So hello everybody, this is Russell from Let's Get Racing, and I'm joined by a very special guest, Tania Kindersley. So Tania, thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for asking me.
No problem. So I've asked to speak to Tania because I became really fascinated by some of the work that she was doing. So Tania's a writer, a writing coach. She works with a really interesting charity called Horseback UK. And if you're interested in finding out a lot more about how Tania works with horses, there's an amazing page and group that Tania set up called the Red Mare, where Tania logs many of the interactions that she's having with her horses, but also with what she calls her posse, which are the young women that she works with around those horses as well. So Tania, thank you so much for joining us. Aside from the very poor introduction that I've just done, what else would you add around what you do with horses and where your love of horses and racehorses has come from?
Oh, I thought it was a beautiful introduction. It made me smile. Um, yeah, I grew up with horses. So probably my earliest memory was of the thoroughbred. And that was following my dad out into the yard in black winter dawns to wake the thoroughbreds up and help. I was tiny little thing, but I'd try and help get their water buckets and feed them their feed. And you can imagine these were race fit steeplechasers. And dad loved really big old Irish horses, proper big old fashioned horses with feet like soup plates, my mum always said. And I had no fear of them whatsoever. They were so gentle, and I just potted under their bellies. And you see it sometimes now on Twitter. Trainers will put up pictures of their own children, and that was my childhood. And that was the gift my dad gave me, that love. And it's still some of my happiest memories. Those are still some of my happiest memories. And then I went away from horses, and I went away from the country, and I was very urban, a lot of wild nights in Soho. And then I moved to Scotland and went back to the country, and I suddenly thought there's something missing. Also, my dad died and I wanted to keep him with me. So I thought, oh, I know, I'll get a thoroughbred and I'll go right back full circle. You know, in our beginning is our end, in our end is our beginning. I love that kind of thing. And I was going to ride her out into the woods and sing the Irish songs that my dad taught me on his knee. And it would all be beautiful. The fact I hadn't had a horse for 30 years meant nothing, because I'd been on a horse before I could form a coherent sentence. And she didn't think that was a good plan. She didn't like my sentimental journey. She hated the woods. She hated Scotland. She hated the songs. So I then I was in despair, and I actually found a completely different way of horsemanship, and a different way of looking. I was looking at horses. I grew up very much in the kick-on school. And now I try and understand the horse's mind, try and see the world through their eyes. And so this thing of a love affair with the thoroughbred that survived all the years I was away from actually owning horses. I was still watching them, and I was still crying when Desert Orchid won the King George, and you know, still going to Aintree and going with my dad. In the days that I used to go with him, when this was when I was a teenager, there wasn't any security. So you could just get up early and go down to the course and watch all the horses exercising in the dawn, in the rising mist. And then somebody would have a flask of coffee and somebody would have a flask of brandy. And you'd end up standing around on the race course, 7 o'clock in the morning, having a nice little cup of coffee with a tot of brandy in it. But yes, so I started to see the thoroughbred, which I'd always been in love with, through a new lens. And I started to learn things I hadn't known about when I was young, like, you know, the evolutionary biology of the prey animal and the flight animal. And I started to think about really connecting with them on a profound level, not just thinking, oh, I've got this incredible horse and it's like a Maserati and I can ride off into the hills. It was actually thinking, who is this horse as a person, as a feeling entity. And the really extraordinary thing is that has made me completely reevaluate the way I do life. So from this rather odd sentimental whim, as I was missing my dad and I wanted to get a horse to remind me of him, I've had a bit of a life change. You know, I look at humans in different ways. I'm much more patient. My empathy meter has gone up quite considerably. So I have this enormous gratitude to the thoroughbred and particularly to my thoroughbred, for really changing my life. That was a very long answer to a very short question.
It was a beautiful answer. So maybe let me push you a bit more then around your thoroughbred. So I know her as the Red Mare, and I know that she used to be a racehorse. So can you maybe say a little bit about how you came by her and what your relationship is now?
Well, she was a very slow, trundly racehorse. When you turn on Saturdays, you know, there's always one out the back. That was my Red Mare. And she's beautifully bred. Her grandfather is Nijinsky. And I know he had, you know, thousands and thousands and thousands of grandchildren, offspring and foals. But I still get a thrill. And I still tell complete strangers that her grandfather was the last horse to win the Triple Crown. And I still see him going past the post in the St. Leger in 1970 with Leicester cheekily looking over his shoulder. And but anyway, she didn't inherit his brilliance, so she had to be retired after finishing, now this is hard to say, 13th out of 13 at Thirsk,
Okay.
which is it's like a classic.
That takes a bit of practice for sure.
And then she went for polo, and she wasn't any good at that either, because there's a special turn you have to be able to make, which she couldn't do. And when I was thinking about this, going back to horses because of missing my dad so much, I went to stay with the friend who had her, who is a professional polo player. And I was saying, I think I should go back to horses. And he said, oh, well, I've got this useless Red Mare in the field. You can't even do low goal. And he brought her up to the back door, and I literally looked at her white face. She's got a great big white blaze. And I just looked at him and I said, I'll take her home. And he went, don't you even want to sit on her? So in order not to look too mad, I did sit on her. I rode her and she was fine. And then I rang up the incredible Eric Gilly, who's the best transport people. They drive horses up and down the country every week. And up she came. And as I say, she wasn't impressed with my sentimental journey because she'd been with this incredible horseman. He's a really instinctive horseman. And suddenly she had amateurish me who I thought I'd remember everything, and I didn't really. And she hates uncertainty. A lot of thoroughbreds do. I think the reason a lot of them are so happy in racing is that everyone in a racing yard really knows what they're doing. And they're all there for a reason, and they've all got a really good routine, and they're all there because they love it. You know, no one goes into racing unless they love it, because there's no money in it. And so there's a kind of certainty in really good yards. And I was just going, oh, shall we go in the woods? And she was going, well, just the woods are full of monsters. And I don't think you can save me from them. And she would rear like a circus horse, and she would shake her head around so badly I thought she had a brain tumor. So that was when I learned this new horsemanship, and she just loved it. So she became the horse that she was always meant to be, but she needed me to be the human that I was meant to be, that she needed me to be. There's a thing that horses prize above all things. I'm not going to say especially thoroughbreds, because I mustn't put them in a special category, although I secretly think they are in the special category, because they're so intelligent and they're so sensitive, but all horses are sensitive. What horses really, really, really love is authenticity. And they love congruence. So if you're going along with your front plastered on, you know, your public self, a long, long way from your secret private self, horses pick up on that and they hate it. So I had to do a lot of, a lot of inner work. She's sometimes called the Duchess because she doesn't put up with second best. So I had quite a hill to climb to meet her standards. But the beautiful thing is that once I got there, and I still have to work on it every day, it's a practice, all these mental practices, she keeps me up to my work because, you know, she's always watching. But the lovely thing about it is that it's like she breathes a huge sigh of relief, literally. Ah, okay, now I've got the person I need. Then she can do anything.
Sure.
Very much like humans or like children. You know, if you encourage them, if you inspire them, if you say, yes, I'm not going to tell you lies, I'm not going to fake anything, I'm going to be my authentic self, and we can do this thing together. That's how you give another human confidence. It's how you give a child confidence. I teach a little, I do a little bit of tutoring. And that's the thing I'm always trying to do with my young ones. It's not, I don't have to teach them Othello. I have to make them believe that they can understand Shakespeare. And it's exactly this, that's what I learned from my horse. If I make her believe that she can handle those woods, then she will become a lioness. She will become an empress. But if I have doubts and I transmit those doubts to her, then we crash. Does that make sense?
That makes tons of sense. And I mean, to oversimplify what you've just said, which was lovely. You know, I'm always disappointed when people say that horse racing is about forcing horses to do something that they don't want to do.
Oh, no.
When it's actually a union of desire, right? You know,
Yeah.
what the jockey, the trainer, and the horse want to do is what sort of manifests what comes to life in a race. And unless those things are in alignment, very little good can come of it. And you know, there's obviously genetics, and there's the kind of physical capability of the horse, but the mental capability of a horse is incredibly important to tune into, to get them to do anything, whether that's race, jump a fence, or stand in a field where you want them to stand. You know, I think it's a brilliant union. And I know that. Sorry, go on, Tony. You were about to say.
Well, it was such an interesting point. Is I suddenly thought, I mean, you're absolutely right, and all the good trainers will talk about getting their minds right, won't they? If you listen to John Gosden or Aidan O'Brien, or you know, the lovely resurgence of York Hill, which amazed everybody. This old fella who looked like he'd fallen out of love with the game, and suddenly he's back. And the trainers, oh, I got his mind right, you know, and you and I understand that and take it for granted because we love horses and we watch racing. But I suddenly thought, as you were saying that anyone outside racing, I don't know if they'd think about the horse's mind, would they? They'd just see a physical entity capable of running very fast, encouraged by another physical entity. And they might see, you know, a lot of movement. So the jockey's pushing with her arms or his arms or kicking with the legs. But actually, as you know, the great jockeys, the Frankie with Enable, the Bryony Frost with Frodon, there are great partnerships in racing, and it's always a mind to mind thing. It's a spirit to spirit thing. It's as if the human has the thought and the horse just responds. So actually, the physical movement is reduced to a minimum because it's a thing of spirit and intention and connecting energies. When I'm being very out in the wilds, on the fringes, and I step into what I call the woo, or sometimes the super woo, I think of the red mare and I standing in our Scottish field on a molecular level, on an atomic level. So I think I'm made of the exploded atoms of ancient stars. I still find that extraordinary. That's why I hesitated before I said exactly. I know it's physics. Is it really true? And you know that famous Joni Mitchell song? She wasn't just singing. She wasn't being a hippie. She was doing physics. We are all stardust. And I think that she is made of, my mare is made of the remnants of ancient exploded stars. And I think if we stand very still and breathe, maybe those stars can touch And that's when it gets really beautiful. Now, I put that in a faintly wafty, poetic way because I'm a writer and I can't help it. But I tell you what, there's a little bit of exploded stardust touching going on out on the track. When you see a really great jockey get into the mind of a really great horse and you see them respond to each other, I think there's a little bit of communication on the atomic level going on.
Sure, sure. And I think we can call it lots of different things, and you know, you've described it much more eloquently than I ever would be able to. But I think on a basic level, it's love and connection, right? And I think what you see is often when horses do amazing things, like an enable or a desert orchid, it's
Yes.
often to do with this connection that they have with their jockey, with whatever they're doing, that propels them forward. In exactly the same way that we get propelled forward as human beings to do something which is sometimes extraordinary beyond what we thought was going to be possible. So I'm conscious of time, and I don't want to take too much of yours, Tania, and I really would love to hear about some of the work you do with the charity that you're a part of, and if you could say a little bit about Horseback UK and their work with thoroughbreds or their work with horses, it would be brilliant.
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me about that. It's such an important part of my life. It's a charity just up the road from me, down the valley, and they use horses to help wounded veterans on the road to recovery. And at the beginning, it was very much people were coming back from Afghan with one leg. And it was very much about getting people who had been physically very active and who now had trouble with physical movement. You know, it's tricky getting used to prosthetics and stuff. And sorry, my dog is whining. And I'm hoping you're not picking it up on your audio.
Well, I'm not. I can't hear it.
Oh, good. That's why, if you wondered, that's why I was looking away. Yes, so it was very much about getting people in the saddle. We had this idea of mobility with dignity. Because once you were on a horse, you could gallop up the hill and it didn't matter if you had a leg missing. And there was a lot of sort of trussing up special saddles, and we used Western saddles, and that was a huge thing. And then we saw the effect that the horses had on the veterans, and something was happening. And we suddenly thought, it's not just about sending them up a Scottish hill. It's not just about movement. It's about what you said. It's about love and connection. It's about coming back to a self that you thought had been blown up in the dust of Helmand Province. And as time went on, we started getting more and more people who weren't so much physically injured as had what we think of as brain injury. So that's all forms of post-traumatic stress. And post-traumatic stress is a slightly unsatisfactory expression because there's so much more to it. That's why we think it's more like a wound to your brain. And there are so many symptoms of it, but one of the biggest ones is isolating. People, they have a sense of shame in feeling broken, and so they hide themselves away. And what we discovered is that if you could put those people we had some people who would literally go to Asda at 3 o'clock in the morning because that was when they were least likely to see other human beings, and that's how hiding away they were. If you could put them with a horse who doesn't care about how many limbs you've got or what's happened to your brain, all they care about is what you make them feel in that moment. Can you connect to them in that moment? Can you be authentic in that moment? Can you keep them safe from the mountain lions in that moment? Because they are prey animals and they really do think in terms of life and death. Can you step up? They do need you to step up. And sometimes you forget that you can do that. And they remind you that, yes, you can. And so for veterans who'd completely lost the thought of being capable, who thought that they'd left all that behind, and we would have people who'd come from us who'd fought in Bosnia or in Northern Ireland or in the Falklands. And there's one who's he was a submariner in the Cold War, and he'd tell you stories about hearing the Russian subs pass, and everyone would hold their breath. And these are people who've been carrying mental injuries for years and years and years and just coping and coping and coping until they couldn't cope anymore. And you put them with a horse, and it was as if it was all right to feel all these uncomfortable or painful or what may be perceived as shameful emotions. And suddenly the healing would start. And, you know, obviously this has been going for 10 years now, and we've tried to quantify it. I write about it for them every day, every week. That's my job for them, is to tell their stories. And there's a little alchemy somewhere I can't quite put my finger on. There's some magic somewhere, but it's mostly about, I think it's about not being judged, at least not being judged in the way that humans are most used to being judged. So they don't, thing about horses, they don't care what car you drive, they don't care what job you do, they don't care if you go to Asda at 3 o'clock in the morning. What they care about is what's there now and what's in your heart. So they really are very good getters back to what's most important. That's, you know, they get you back to what's most important. That helps me just with keeping a mental equilibrium in these difficult times of the pandemic. But it also helps people who've got really serious brain injuries and mental health struggles. And we see people come back to life, we really do. And part of our herd is we have 3 ex-race horses. So the lovely thoroughbreds, these great loves of my life, are now doing a job which most people would say, oh, they can't do, you know, because they're all crazy and they can run really fast. That's all they can do. We've got an ex-sprinter. He ran something like 99 times, top speed at 6 furlongs. And now, you know, he works for people in wheelchairs.
Wow.
So it's very lovely on very many levels, very hopeful. That's what I love about it. You know, everybody gets a second act.
And Tania, in case anybody watching or listening to this wanted to find out more about Horseback UK, where would they go?
Oh, we've got a Facebook page. That's the best. There's a website. So if you just put in Horseback UK, you will find our website. But the Facebook, and there's a Twitter. I do the Facebook page. My lovely friend, Ian Wren, who's a veteran, he does the Twitter page. And I always want the word to get out because it really is amazing what happens there. People's lives are changed and saved. And the work the horses do, and it's quite tough work. You know, the people who come, they're all beginners. They have to learn everything from scratch. A lot of them are in a pretty dark place. The horses really step up to that work. And the more people who know about that, the happier I am. So yes, go and look on Facebook, go and look on Twitter, and there is a website as well.
And if people want to find out more about your writing, where would they go?
I also have a Facebook page, so just look under, and Twitter, and I put links to everything. And I write books and I teach writing now, which I really love too. So I love, the reason that most people don't write as well as they could is they have a whole lot of internal hurdles or internal voices or gremlins, as I call them sometimes, just saying, you know, you're not good enough. You couldn't write bum on a dusty blind. And, you know, who are you? There's a lot of who are you? And I think getting rid of those voices or learning how to make friends with those voices, actually, so they don't crush you, is a really important thing. So I used to teach all about technical stuff and narrative arc and character development. It's all nonsense. Any fool can learn that. What we need to do is get rid of the terrors in the mind, the hurdles in the mind. And then you're as free as a Mongolian horse galloping across the steppe. So yes, just look me up on Facebook, look me up on Instagram, and look me up on Twitter. I love the social media, actually. I find that if you follow the good people, there's a lot of beauty out there. It doesn't all have to be everybody having huge rows and cancelling each other.
Well, I think there's a lot of truth in that, and it's certainly through social media that I found you, and I'm really appreciative of the time you've taken to meet some of our gang at Let's Get Racing. And Tania Kindersley, thank you so much for agreeing to have me ask you a few questions about these wonderful thoroughbreds. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, I've loved it. Thank you so much.